Hi everyone, I'm Marcelo. I'm a 21-year-old founding design engineer at Gumloop. I'm one of 30 Neo Scholars selected last year by early investors in OpenAI, Meta, Kalshi, Ramp, and Cursor, and I'm a top 0.4% Cursor user in the entire world.
While AI is evolving super fast, you can literally prompt your designs into existence, and tools like Cursor or Figma Make are getting scary good. Designers are being pushed to write more and more code, design engineering. A profession that isn't just surviving this chaos, it's thriving in it. Today we are sitting down with a design engineer here at Gumloop, and we are about to find out how to become a design engineer.
Gumloop is a YC-backed startup used by companies like Shopify, Ramp, Gusto, and DoorDash, and more. We raised a $17 million Series A just over a year ago now, and what we are is an AI automation operating system for enterprises. What's a design engineer? I like to think of design engineering as people who can kind of close that gap between what something should feel like and what it ends up feeling like. I feel like in a traditional setup, we have designers who are really concerned about how something should feel like, how it should look, how it should change, and then engineers are responsible for how it ends up actually being to the user. And a design engineer is someone who can kind of close that gap and reduce the translation loss between what a designer knows and what an engineer ends up doing. And they understand things like visual hierarchies, they understand things how data flows, but it can also put things into the actual product. And design engineering is like this big spectrum. You can either be like a design heavy design engineer or an engineering heavy design engineer. And somewhere in between there is like all sorts of different combinations, but it's really anyone who has a superpower to turn their taste into actual software.
What's the future for this role in the AI era?
I think design engineering in the future with all these AI advancements looks a little bit like a more intense version of what we have today. I think that AI and these like coding agents and all the things that help you kind of write software is kind of turning us into this world where designers are really going to be able to code and engineers are going to be able to code faster than ever. So the kind of this bottleneck that used to exist of like we can't write code fast enough is going to be slowly removed. And I think that the real bottleneck is going to become like the taste. Like how do we make things feel good? How do we make things like feel delightful and clear and easier to understand? And I think that designers are going to have a really big advantage there because that's inherently what their job is.
So the future is bright.
The future's very bright. When I'm in kind of this investigative phase, I collect a lot of inspiration from my favorite websites and my favorite designers and kind of try to see what they do. And one of the things I do is when I think about a layout, like for example, when I'm building my personal website, I look at my favorite blogs and I kind of try to understand if we were to like put this into some sort of grid, how many columns would be in this grid for like the whole thing to look like it matches the grid. And what I realized is that my favorite blog has it has kind of 13 columns. In the middle 5 columns is where all the content was, and then I had like a column of space, and then like the menu or like some sort of additional details on the column beside those. And I applied that same approach to my website, and it just looks like a really consistent way to like kind of like space all your things out. And the reason I did this is because this felt really good. And I wasn't really sure why it felt really good. And what I realized is that we really love patterns as people. And I just wanted to recognize what pattern was this person using and how can I use it as well.
How much code do you actually need to know? Like how good do you need to be and which languages matter?
Yeah, I think this is the part that the designers really worry about the most, and they should, but I feel like it's largely misunderstood. I feel like people think that you need to be like a pure like software engineer, be super technical in order to kind of become this design engineer persona. But the reality is that you just need to be really exceptional at thinking in these models that like designers already think about. Like they think about how states change and think about how the people flow through the product. And really design engineering is like one layer on top of that, and thinking about how the data flows and thinking about how to debug things when things go wrong using these AI tools. But it's less about actually writing the code yourself and more about kind of understanding these fundamentals and understanding how to trace the logic when you look at the code, and using these AI tools to your advantage to kind of generate the large sum of it. Of course, you can dive deep into engineering if you're really passionate about it, but you don't necessarily have to. But strictly and practically speaking, I think the most important things and the necessary things to know as a design engineer is your HTML and CSS, which is basically how you transform design into like this grammar that ends up being put on user screens. and then JavaScript or TypeScript, which is kind of this language of the internet that we all use, and it's kind of tying these two things together, like what happens when you click this button, and like kind of how does all the data move around the platform. So those are two really important kind of languages that you need to know, or I guess three. Another thing that I do is I also kind of go through their colors, and I try to see what kind of patterns exist in their colors, and a lot of times what I realize is that there's always like two different background colors that they use. There's like the regular background, there's a background that's just a bit lighter, and then there's like their background that's just a little bit darker. And they use it for different cases, and then what I realized, at least for one of my favorite designers, they have two different background colors, they have two different border colors, and then they have like they're muted, so like a little bit darker than their background, and then they're muted like foreground, so it's like their text that goes on like the muted backgrounds, or like the text that's like a little bit lighter than like your regular text. And a pattern that I recognized by like doing this kind of investigation is that the steps between like background 1 and background 2 is like 2% lighter in like the luminance in like the HSL, and then like it's 2% lighter to get to the muted background, and it's 2% lighter to get to like the lighter border. Or sorry, 2% darker, and it's 2% darker to get to the darker border.
Should beginners now focus more on reviewing AI or writing codes themselves, especially with all this MCPs and stuff?
Yeah, I think that my answer might be a little bit biased here. I'm a really big believer of learning things from first principles. And even if you're not exceptional at it, I think that you should kind of learn both in the right order, but you don't necessarily have to go super deep. Like, I think it's really important for someone who wants to be a design engineer to kind of get their hands dirty and build something super simple and understand why it works. You don't necessarily have to be so deeply technical that you build this venture-backed startup and then you're considered a design engineer. I think you just need to really leverage these AI tools and maybe write a little bit of code yourself to kind of just understand how are these buttons interacting? How does this button cause this other thing to change? And really understanding how the things interact. And that's how you kind of develop this great intuition. And that step is really simple. Like, what I would do is I would just hop on Cursor, I would think of this idea, and I would ask it to implement it like step by step, like super granular, and tell me why it did it this way. And then that way you can kind of build this like the intuition of like, this feels right and this looks good. And then after that, it's really, I think the next era of these design engineers are going to be these AI first engineers. We see companies like Cursor and Windsurf taking away like the ability to, not taking away, but kind of giving you this other mode to not even look at the code and only look at the output of the code, and all you see is like this chatbot. And I think that a lot of people from here on out will start just like prompting these tools. So I think that by understanding these fundamentals, you become really, really good at reviewing code. But at the end of the day, as a design engineer, I think, especially on the way everything's going, reviewing code is going to become so important, so you can move fast, and so you can, like, you don't have to be super technical, and you can kind of translate your ideas from Figma to code.
Can you show us like your Figma?
Yeah. I'm kind of prototyping a bunch of different components I have here. For example, here I have this heat map. So traditionally, like, you see these like squares, but I wanted to have this like kind of pill, and every single pill represents 1 week in the year. And if you were to like click over one of the pills, it would kind of open this summary of like how much code I've written that week, like what songs I've been listening to that week. So I use Figma for a lot of my design exploration.
And you're like really good at prototyping in Figma, right?
I learned a lot through watching these tutorials online. I think Figma has actually a lot of really great online tutorials about how to leverage their components, component variants, like their tokens. Yeah, I think it's totally possible to learn on your own. I think I'm an example of that. I taught myself at the end of my freshman year how to program, and that would have been almost 3 years ago now. And within like a year, I started working as like as an engineer. And then 2 years later, I had built my own like design and engineering company, and we were doing a lot of client work and consultancy work. So people ended up paying us to like do all this sort of work. And that was me starting with no design, like no really deep design, and no engineering skills at all. So if somebody's already a designer, kind of making that jump to get a little bit familiar with code is super possible. I think you just need to kind of understand these fundamentals of how, like what are the building blocks that make up a website, and then really learn how to leverage these AI tools in order to to kind of convert what your taste is into the actual code. And then if you're more of like an engineer, I think you just need to learn the fundamentals of design and kind of think about what platforms you really like, what's beautiful about them, and like why you think they're beautiful. And then just continuously try to like build a little bit more and more every single day. Start a project and kind of try to go deep into different aspects of it. Try to design it the best you can, and try to use AI to kind of convert your designs into code. And then one of the big advices that I have is like read a ton. Like I read a bunch of documentation, I read a lot of blogs, and people tend to share a lot of like kind of their own little life hacks through those blogs, and you can just kind of pick up things along the way. But it's really about consistency. Like if you are just consistent and try to learn a little bit more every single day, it'll always beat like someone who's like a little bit more talented but doesn't put that same consistency in. So I think totally somebody can learn on their own. It's just a matter of the hours you want to put in and how often you want to be putting in those hours. At Gumloop, I'm a design engineer, as I said, and we have two of them, and we basically take care of all the design and all the front end for the platform. And that means we have a lot of ground to cover, since it's a very, really like comprehensive and complex platform, and that means that the design needs to be really like simple. It needs to have people feel like it's quite a simple way to use all these tools together. So to go a little deeper, like what Gumloop does is it helps you tie all these tools that companies use together, like their calendar, their Airtable, their Salesforce, their like Google Drive, and all these different things, and it helps them use it all in a one repeatable and consistent workflow. So instead of having people kind of take their time to go through every single one of these tools just to copy and paste some data every single time something happens, you can set up a workflow to do it every single time. For example, a new row is added to a Google Sheet. And these systems can be really complex, so we try to kind of make it really simple for the user to understand and to build these workflows like through a drag and drop visual canvas. And there's a lot of kind of like complications that come with that, and it's really kind of hard to make it so simple because every single platform has so many capabilities, and you need to show the users what they can do, but not in an overwhelming way. And then as people build these automation workflows, they need to be able to kind of save a checkpoint at a point in time and be able to go back to that checkpoint. But then there's even more complications with that, because what happens if like some things changed on the original like spreadsheet that you were connected to and everything, and we really need to help them understand what might be broken, what might be working, why it might be broken.
How do you think, like, because now is market is crazy for his job, how to approach that questions in general, because it's probably like not easy.
Yeah, I think
first one,
highlighted. The market these days is like super competitive. It's super intense. All these tools that are letting people write code means that there's more people kind of competing for these positions because they're being empowered. But at the end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, the bottleneck is now becoming like taste. It now becomes like, are you truly, like, do you have this true intuition on what feels good and why it feels good? And the ability to explain that to somebody. And what code lets you do is like, it lets you kind of show this in a more tangible way where like you no longer have to wait to find a technical counterpart. You can just kind of go in and build a product that's beautiful. And in this day and age, especially here at Gumloop, is like one huge example of that is like cold emails is everything. I got my first job through a cold email. I got my second job through a cold email. And then Gumloop, I got as a result of like all these like cold emails I had sent, and then Max, the CEO here, found me at an event. And that's just because I kind of cold emailed my way through all these different like communities and processes to kind of put myself in this position. And I think that if you build something beautiful and you're able to cold email somebody and show them, and it truly is something that they appreciate and that they know how to appreciate, then you can find a job that way. It just might take it might just take a lot of persistence, because there's a lot of cold emails being sent these days. But at the end of the day, if you have this like magnificent taste and then you build this ability to turn that into software, it's just a matter of time, I think.
Designer with zero code skills, where to start?
Yeah, I think in this day and age, it all goes back to kind of leveraging all these AI tools. If I were starting out as a designer who didn't know how to code at all, I would go through a similar process as to what I went through when I started, but kind of modify the way I leveraged AI. Like the first thing I do is I would pick this simple idea, this really small project that I think is fun to build. That I think is interesting, and I think has a lot of like different complexities and design problems to it. And I would just design a screen on Figma, and I would throw like that screen into Cursor, like start a project with like Next.js, like which is like you can just Google and find online how to start one. Throw like the screenshot into Cursor, and ask it to implement like one small feature of it, and tell you why it did the things a certain way and like why it made some decisions. And then if you can continue doing that step by step by step, and at the end of the time that you've built this like really small project, you start to kind of understand and build these mental models about like how these AI tools think, how you can communicate to them, like what is the best way to leverage them, and then eventually just to kind of start doing things a little bit more complex, and just start reading more. Like I said, read blogs, read documentation, and continue to build these small projects incrementally until you get to the point where like you have the confidence where you can figure these things out. Like if the AI messes up, you have this confidence where you can like understand how to, like where it might have gone wrong. It's not about like figuring out how to be the best programmer. It's about figuring out how to like best communicate your design and your like functionality, like feature ideas to the AI, and then have them do the work and then review their work and get really exceptional at that feedback loop iteratively. And like that's how I think I would start these days.
And it's interesting that you haven't mentioned like just like, I don't know, some online courses on HTML, CSS, JavaScript and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's actually what I did when I started. I went on Code Academy and I did like one of their intro to web development courses. It's free, it's straightforward, it's short. It really teaches you like the very fundamentals of how to use HTML, how to use CSS, and how to use like JavaScript, just enough for you to like gain this confidence that you can figure out if something goes wrong, where it went wrong. I think that's also a really important way to go about it. I think everyone has a different way of learning, and I think courses are for sure a way that a lot of people find helpful. I think once I did one of those like intro level fundamental courses, I really went into like this like tinkering phase where I just tried to do it as many times as I can. And when I ran into a problem, I would then Google it and like what does this mean? Like what is this error? How can I fix this? And nowadays you can use ChatGPT and it will give you like this full like kind of breakdown and curriculum as to like why or like what a certain thing means. So from my point of view, it's like you build something until you run into a wall, and then you use like your like online resources or AI or some sort of LLM to explain to you like what this wall is and how do you get through this wall, and then just keep doing that and doing.
How do you keep up with AI speed?
Yeah, I think it's like a job on its own. You need to read like constantly. I feel like I mentioned blogs like a million times in this kind of video, but I read so many blogs, it's like unbelievable. Like every day I scroll through Twitter, and if you look through my Twitter bookmarks, it's all just like this guy made a blog about something super niche that no one else cares about, but he really cared about it, so I'm gonna go read that and learn about that thing. Or OpenAI dropped a blog about this new model they're releasing, or this new technique that they are like reporting about. Or Anthropic dropped a new Claude model, and like this is why it's good and this is what it's good at. And it's about like reading a ton of news that like about these things that are coming out, because when people develop new things in the AI space, they want to tell people about it. So they're already putting it in these like blog forms or article forms or essay forms that are really easy for people to digest. So if you just spend a lot of time reading those, and like what I do is I spend my weekends like experimenting with all these new things that I'm learning and talking to people who are like working in this space or who are also really passionate about leveraging all these new things. You start to like kind of build this cadence where like you're really used to reading these blogs and then asking people about it and then experimenting with it, and you just get really immersed and really excited about it. I think that's like kind of what's happened to me. But I think my general like heuristic here is that like I think I want to like carefully curate kind of like all the things that I like read, all like my inputs, so that like my output is just as like cutting edge. It's just as interesting. It's just as informed, and it's like really high quality, because I think that, like that's what's really important.
Biggest mistakes starting out?
Yeah, I think people think it's gonna be like this really easy to like skip steps process, but I think learning things from first principles is really important. I think it's really important to build these strong mental models about how these users flow through products, how the data flows through the code, how the code interacts with like the UI. And it's very basic fundamentals that people try to skip. And what happens there is that they run into this bottleneck when they, it's hard to be exceptional if you don't understand the very fundamentals of things. And you need to really be used to the discomfort of not being able to ship something in a day. Sometimes you'll run into walls and it's really easy to give up. But I think the feeling of figuring it out, especially when it's a new skill, is super exciting and super valuable. I think that people make the mistake of thinking that it's gonna be the way that design feels easier for them. They think that code is immediately gonna feel easy to them. But it's the same process. You learned design over so long, and you did so much experimenting with design, and you didn't have as many tools when you were learning design. But now you have so many tools to learn coding. So yes, it's going to be easier, but it's still going to be a little bit challenging. And you don't want to skip those very fundamental steps or building those really strong mental models to help you be a really great design engineer.
Can you share with us your favorite websites? Useful tools.
Yeah, of course. My favorite websites and my favorite useful tools that I've been obsessed with lately. The first one would have to be this one called Cost UI. It's this new UI library that came out. It was made by a company called Cost. They made cal.com, and they're making a bunch of other things, and they released this UI library based on this one of the most accessible kind of UI frameworks, if you could call it, or other libraries called Base UI. This is really detailed, but I love that because if you see the dialogues and they look so beautiful, and you see how they stack against each other and they look great. Another thing I always refer back to is the web interface guidelines by one of the designers at Marcelo. It's just it tells you kind of the best accessibility practices, but also what feels good and what feels instant to a user and what feels lag to a user, when to leverage different animations and stuff like that, and when to leverage the different kind of accessibility features that code gives you. Another one that I love to use, I think I just go on Twitter a lot, and I just follow my favorite designers. I follow people in the design community, and I scroll through Twitter, and I like and save anything that I want to refer back to, so that my algorithm knows that you should give me way more of these different types of things, and you should give me way more design and way more blogs about design and engineering. And I like to just scroll through all those, and I just read a lot of those things that pop up over there.
Can you share your daily tool stack?
Yeah, my daily tool stack, I think, it's actually pretty consistent almost every single day. I think I spend over half the day in Cursor, maybe about 60%, doing actual design engineering work and fixing bugs and working on the platform itself. I think I probably spend 10% of my time literally just on ChatGPT, talking back and forth with it, trying to understand how to approach a certain problem, or how what are certain edge cases that I could be missing when I think about a problem. I think another 10% of the time is on Linear, which is where we use all our project management for tickets and stuff, and I go on tickets and I kind of try to leave all my notes about how I'm investigating a certain bug or how I'm investigating a certain feature, or kind of copy and paste what I have in ChatGPT on there to save it. And so that other people can refer back to and kind of understand why I did it this way, and what are the certain edge cases that I handle and why I handle it a certain way. And then the other percentages are kind of just a little bit sparse between different tools. I'm on Slack a lot, talking to the team. I'm on Figma, trying to do some design exploration, especially on the weekends. If it's not at work, I'm normally on Figma on the weekends, trying to kind of figure out different design patterns that I could use. But yeah, and then the rest is I'm on Twitter a lot. Between when my coding agents are doing their work, I go on Twitter or I go on LinkedIn and kind of just scroll to see if I can find any blogs to read later in the day. But yeah, I think that's the majority of it.
What's your day-to-day?
My day-to-day looks pretty consistently the same. I think that kind of the structure of it's the same, but the things I'm actually doing every day is very, very different. Normally I come in around 9:45, 10. We have our first meeting at 10:15 that is what we call stand-up. We kind of go through what every engineer is going to be working on for that day and for the next coming days. And then we kind of just elaborate on any questions we might have as a team, share any news we might have as a team, if we got a new customer, or if we heard something cool from the news or something like that, or if there's some new AI model released and we talk about how we might be able to use it. And then yeah, my first few hours of the day are kind of spent fixing different problems in the platform, different bugs that users find that is kind of impeding their ability to really use the platform to the best of their abilities. And that is a lot of just kind of like tracing down, like watching a bunch of these sessions replays on PostHog, seeing how people are like coming up with these or like running into these problems and then figuring out why that happened. And then we DoorDash lunch and dinner every single day. Like we spend quite a lot of time in the office, so I'm normally here from, like I said, 9:45 to 10:30 most days. So we get our free lunch, we get our free dinner from DoorDash, and like after lunch, I spend most of my time doing like feature work. Depends what kind of feature I'm working on at the time, but most of the time I do a lot of front end work. Like almost all my time and feature work is spent like on Cursor and writing a lot of code in like TypeScript on Next.js. Yeah, I feel like it is really different. Sometimes I spend a lot of time on ChatGPT trying to ask it how to approach this problem I'm having. Sometimes I spend a lot of time on Slack talking back and forth with the team, trying to figure out like if someone else had tried something similar in the past, like why did they do it that way? How did they do it? And then sometimes when we have enough time, I get to go into Figma and do some kind of design exploration and figure out how I might want a certain page to look if it's something that's brand new. Or I'll like be tweaking it in the code, like line by line, trying to figure out like what is this text like dark enough or light enough, and does this button look delightful when you hover over it, or when you click a drop down, does that look good? Like does the buttons kind of stay highlighted so you know that that button is selected, and kind of small details like that.
Yeah, I think we did.
Well, nice. Well done.
Yeah, well done. Thank you. I get inspired. Yay.